A simple melody from a young black girl's fingertips reached the heart of a dying. Billionaire. What happened next changed both their lives forever. Amara Johnson was 12 years old, but there was something about her that made her feel older than her age. Maybe it was her big eyes, always watching the world quietly. Or maybe it was the way she listened before she spoke, like someone who had already seen too much. She lived with her mother in a small apartment in a low-income neighborhood on the east side of Detroit. Their building was old, the walls thin, and the heater often broken in the winter. But Amara never complained. She was used to making the best of what she had, her mother Cynthia. Worked 2 jobs, one at a diner in the mornings and another cleaning offices late into the night. Most days, she came home tired, her feet sore and her back aching. But she always smiled when she saw Amara waiting with a cup of tea or a warm hug. They didn't have much, but they had each other. That was something Amara didn't have. Toys, like other kids. She didn't own a tablet or a phone. What she did have was music. Not the kind that came from speakers or headphones, but the kind that lived inside her. It had started when she was 5, just tapping on kitchen pots with wooden spoons while her mother cooked, and she began humming made-up tunes while walking to school. The music followed her everywhere when she was happy, when she was sad, and even when she was lonely. There was a small community center just 3 blocks away from their apartment. It was old, just like the neighborhood, and barely had any money to keep it running. But it had one special thing inside: a big, dusty, upright piano. It sat in the corner of the main hall, half forgotten, with chipped keys and scratches on its wooden sides. Most people walked right past it without a second look, but Amara, she saw it like it was magic. One rainy afternoon, when she was 9, Amara walked into the community center after school, soaking wet. Her umbrella had flipped inside out and her shoes squished with water. She stood near the piano, staring at it for a long time. Then she slowly lifted the wooden cover and pressed a single key. Made a low, hollow sound, but to Amara, it was beautiful. The janitor, Mr. Willis, was sweeping the floor nearby. He saw her standing there and smiled. "Do you know how to play that thing?" he asked. "No, sir," Amara replied softly, "but I want to." "Well," he said with a chuckle, "ain't nobody using it. Knock yourself out." From that day on, the piano became her secret world. She came every day after school, drying her hands on her coat before touching the keys. She had no teacher. No one showed her how to play. But somehow, her fingers found the right notes. She started with small patterns, like the rhythm of raindrops. Then she added more notes, turning her feelings into sound. She didn't know the names of the chords or the scales, but she knew when something felt right. Mr. Willis started staying later just to listen. He would sit on a folding chair, eyes closed, as Amara played whatever came to her mind. Sometimes it was a soft, sad tune. Sometimes it was playful and bright. One evening, after a particularly sweet melody, he clapped his hands and said, "Girl, you got a gift?" Amara just smiled. She didn't know if it was a gift. All she knew was that when she played, everything felt better, quieter, calmer. The noise of the world faded, and her thoughts became clear. Other people began to notice, too. A few mothers waiting for their kids at the community center stopped to listen. Teenagers walking by would pause, drawn in by the gentle sound. Even the grumpy manager of the center, Miss Beverly, once said, "You keep that up, Amara. You're bringing peace to this place." Despite the attention, Amara stayed humble. She still wore hand-me-down sweaters and helped her mother with chores every night. But in her heart, she began to dream. She imagined playing on big stages with shiny grand pianos and people clapping. For her, she imagined her mother in the front row, proud and smiling, but those were just dreams. In the real world, there was no money for music lessons. No one in her family had ever gone to college. The only piano she had was the old one at the center. Still, she kept playing. One day, her school counselor, Mrs. Pruitt, pulled her aside. "I've been hearing about your piano playing," she said kindly. "Would you be interested in performing at the hospital downtown? There's a volunteer group visiting patients next month, and we could use a musician." Amara blinked. "Me perform? Mrs. Pruitt nodded. It's nothing big. Just a few patients. But your music could brighten someone's day. Think about it. Mara went home that night and told her mother. Cynthia hugged her and said, "Baby, if your music can bring light into someone's pain, then you have something more powerful than money." So Mara agreed. She spent the next few weeks preparing. She didn't write down anything, she couldn't read sheet music anyway. But she practiced every day, choosing the softest, gentlest melodies from her heart. She wanted to play something that felt like a warm hug, something that said, "You're not alone." The day of the hospital visit was cold and gray. Mara wore her best dress, a faded blue one that used to belong to her cousin. Her mother tied her hair back in a neat braid and kissed her forehead. When they arrived at the hospital, Mara was nervous. The building was so big, the air smelled like medicine, and everything felt too quiet. She followed the volunteer group down long hallways, past patients in wheelchairs and nurses with tired eyes. Finally, they reached a special wing on the top floor. The nurse explained that the patients there were very sick, some were near the end of their lives. It wasn't easy, the nurse said, but music sometimes helped them feel less scared. Mara nodded, her hands shaking a little. They brought her to a room with a small keyboard set up beside a hospital bed. The patient inside was an old man, thin and pale, with tubes running from his nose. Machines beeped softly beside him. A nurse whispered, "This is Mr. Bernard Whitmore. He hasn't spoken in days." But you never know, music does strange things. Mara stepped closer. The man's eyes were closed. His skin was pale like paper. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. But then she sat at the keyboard, took a deep breath, and let her fingers find the notes. She played slowly, gently. The melody came from her memories, the sound of rain on the window, the hush of her mother's voice at bedtime, the quiet ache of wanting more. Her fingers moved with grace, even though they trembled. The room filled with music, soft and slow, like a lullaby for someone who had forgotten how to sleep. Then something strange happened. The man opened his eyes. Mara didn't notice at first. She was too focused. But the nurse gasped, and Mara looked up. The old man's eyes were open and they were looking straight at her. He didn't speak, but his lips moved slightly. Mara leaned closer, unsure if she heard it right. He whispered, "Mara." She froze. The nurse was stunned. "How? He's never seen you before. How does he know your name?" Mara didn't know. Her heart pounded. She felt like something bigger than herself had just happened. But she didn't ask questions, simply smiled, placed her hands back on the keys, and kept playing. In that moment, something shifted inside her. She realized her music wasn't just for herself anymore. It wasn't just a secret escape. It had the power to touch others, to reach places that even doctors couldn't go. Somehow, a simple tune from a shy little girl had stirred a soul that was nearly gone. When she finished, the room was silent. The nurse wiped her eyes. The old man's lips curved into the tiniest smile. Mara stood, gently closed the keyboard cover, and said softly, "Goodbye, Mr. Whitmore." As she walked out of the room, her legs felt like jelly, but her heart felt full. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know that her life had just changed forever. But deep inside, she felt something new, something warm and quiet and bright, like the start of a miracle. The next morning after the hospital visit, Mara couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She had played her music for an old man she didn't know. And somehow, without warning, he had opened his eyes, whispered her name, and smiled. It felt like a dream, something too strange and beautiful to be real. She had told her mother everything that night, and her mother had listened quietly, her eyes wide. "That's something special, baby," Cynthia said gently. "Not everyone gets to touch someone's soul like that." Mara nodded slowly, but in her heart, she still didn't fully understand it. How did he know her name? Why had he reacted like that? Was it just a coincidence, or was it something more? She returned to school the next day, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the hospital. She stared out the window during math class, remembering the pale, quiet face of Mr. Bernard Whitmore. That was the name the nurse had told her. It sounded like the kind of name that belonged in a history book or on the front of a tall building. Who was this man really? That afternoon, she walked to the community center and sat at the old piano. Her fingers touched the keys softly, almost as if she was afraid to play. But slowly, the same melody she had played for Mr. Whitmore returned to her. Her hands moved on their own, playing the tune exactly the way she had the day before. Da-da-da. Once again, the music felt warm, deep, and full of something she couldn't explain. Mr. Willis, the janitor, watched her from the doorway. When she finished, he asked, "You okay, Amara? You've been real quiet today." She nodded. "Okay, just thinking. About the hospital." She nodded again. "You know," he said, walking over and sitting down beside her, "some people say music can reach the parts of us that words can't. Maybe that man." But he heard something in your music that pulled him back for a moment. Mara looked at the keys. "He said my name." Mr. Willis raised his eyebrows. "Well, that's something. Maybe you two are connected in some strange way?" Amara smiled, but she still felt confused. The next day, something even more surprising happened. Mrs. Pruitt, her school counselor, called her to the office again. This time she was smiling more than usual. "Amara," she said, "I got a call. This morning from the hospital, Mr. Whitmore. Bernard is asking to see you again." Amara blinked. "Me? Why?" Mrs. Pruitt shrugged with a warm grin. "He says he wants to hear you play again," the nurse said. "He's been more awake and responsive since your visit." They were all surprised. Amara's heart began to race. Didn't know what to say. A part of her felt nervous. What if she disappointed him this time? What if it had all been an accident? But another part of her deep down felt excited. Something about it felt right. 2 days later, Amara and her mother returned to the hospital. This time they didn't come with a group. It was just the two of them. The nurse, a tall, cheerful woman named Donna, met them in the hallway and smiled warmly. "He's been waiting for you," she said. "He asks about you every morning. You've never seen him like this before." When Amara walked into the room, Bernard Whitmore was awake, sitting up in bed, a blanket across his legs. His face looked a little less pale this time, and his eyes were clear. "There she is," he said softly, his voice rough but full of warmth. Amara smiled shyly and waved. "Hi, Mr. Whitmore," he smiled back. "Call me Bernard." She sat down at the keyboard again, and once more her fingers began to play. This time, the melody was different. Not the one from before, but something new, something brighter. It sounded like sunlight on a spring morning, or the feeling of hope returning after a long, cold night. Bernard closed his eyes and listened closely. His breathing slowed. His hands rested calmly on the blanket. When she finished, there was silence in the room for a moment, and Bernard opened his eyes and said, "You know, I've heard music all over the world. I've been to opera houses in Italy and concert halls in Vienna, but I've never heard anything like what you just played." Mara looked down, embarrassed. "I don't really know how to play. I just make it up." "That's exactly why." "It's beautiful," Bernard said, "because it's real. It comes from your soul." Amara didn't know what to say to that. But her mother, who had been standing quietly in the corner, wiped a tear from her eye. That day turned into a weekly visit. Every Saturday, Amara would come to the hospital to play for Bernard. She never brought sheet music. She didn't need to. Each time, she played what she felt, sometimes sad, sometimes hopeful, sometimes funny and fast. A child hearing a bedtime story. Between songs, they talked. At first, only a little. But over time, Bernard began to share more. He told her about his life, how he had grown up during the Great Depression, how he had worked hard to build a business, empire, and how he had made more money than he ever knew what to do with. He had homes in 5 cities, a private jet, and paintings worth millions. But none of it had made him truly happy. "I spent my whole life chasing numbers," he said one afternoon. "And now, at the end, the only thing that brings me peace is listening to a little girl play a tune from her heart." Amara didn't always understand everything he said, but she listened. She felt like she was learning something that couldn't be taught in school. Bernard wasn't just a sick old man. He was a man full of regrets, memories, and wishes that had never come true. One day she asked him, "Don't you have any family?" He looked out the window for a long time before answering. No, I was too busy to build one. I pushed people away. I thought I didn't need anyone. Now I know I was wrong. That made Amara sad. She thought about how different her own life was. Even though she and her mom didn't have money, they had love. They had each other. That was something Bernard had never really known. Soon, the hospital staff began to notice changes in Bernard. He was eating better, started asking to walk around the hall with the help of a nurse. His eyes were brighter, his mood lighter. Some doctors whispered that it was a psychological turnaround, but most people believed it was something deeper. It's the girl, Nurse Donna said one day. That child has brought him back to life. Amara didn't believe she had that kind of power, but she did notice the change. Every time she entered the room, Bernard smiled a little wider, and she found herself smiling too. Their friendship grew in a quiet, special way. Bernard would ask her about school, about her favorite books, about her dreams. One day he asked, "If you could be anything, what would you want to be?" Amara thought for a moment. "A music teacher," she said. "I want to teach kids who don't have money how to play, so they can feel what I feel." Bernard nodded slowly. "It's a beautiful dream." He paused, then said, I never had a dream like that. I only thought about what I could buy. But you think about what you can give." Amara didn't really know how to respond. She just looked down at the keyboard and pressed a few gentle notes. That weekend, something unusual happened. Bernard asked the nurse to help him out of bed. With shaking hands and weak legs, he stood beside the keyboard where Amara was sitting. Staff were nervous, but he insisted. "Play something simple," he said to her, so she did. A soft, slow melody, and with trembling fingers, Bernard reached out and began to play a few notes with her. They weren't in time. They weren't even the right keys. But somehow it worked. The sound filled the room like magic. It was a duet, clumsy, imperfect, but full of heart. Everyone who witnessed it said the same thing afterward. It was like watching a miracle. The next day, the story began to spread. The nurses told other staff. A doctor mentioned it to a journalist. Soon, people in the city started talking about the young girl who brought a dying billionaire back to life with music. But Amara didn't care about that. All she cared about was that Bernard was smiling more, laughing more, living more one afternoon. As she packed up to leave, Bernard took her hand and said, "Amara, I want you to know something. You've changed my life. You've given me peace I never thought I'd find." Amara felt her throat tighten. "You changed mine too," she whispered. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about how strange and beautiful life was. How a girl from a tiny apartment with no piano of her own could find herself in a hospital room with a man who once owned the world. And somehow, with a few simple notes, their lives had become forever connected. She didn't know what would happen next. But she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something bigger than either of them could imagine. Days turned into weeks, and Amara's visits to the hospital became something special. Not just for Bernard, but for everyone in the hospital. The nurses looked forward to seeing her. The patients down the hall would sometimes ask if the music girl had come yet. Even the security guard at the front door smiled every time she walked in with her little keyboard in hand. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about the light she brought with her. The way her smile filled the room. The way her presence made Bernard once a man waiting to dine, a man trying to live. Amara, only 13, didn't fully understand the power of what she was doing. She didn't know that newspapers were starting to write small stories about her, that people in the city were beginning to whisper about the young girl whose music was healing a billionaire. She just did what felt natural. She came, she played, she listened, and she loved. One Saturday morning, Bernard sat up in bed waiting for her. He had a blanket over his lap and a small book resting beside him. When Amara walked in, he looked happier than usual. "I have something for you," he said, his voice steady. She smiled and sat down in her usual spot near the keyboard. "What is it?" He handed her the book. "It's a music journal. My assistant brought it from my house. I used to collect rare pieces of sheet music. This one's empty, though," I thought. Maybe you could write your own songs in it. Amara opened the leather-bound book gently. The pages were blank, crisp, and full of promise. Her eyes lit up. I've never had a music journal before. Well, Bernard said with a twinkle in his eye, now you do. That afternoon, Amara played a brand new melody. It was soft and emotional, full of rising and falling notes. She didn't know why, but this one made her feel a little sad. When she finished, Bernard was quiet. He looked out the window for a moment before turning back to her. Amara, I want to tell you something I've never told anyone. She nodded and listened. I wasn't always alone, he began. Many years ago, when I was still building my business, I fell in love with a woman. Her name was Ruth. Was a school teacher, kind, beautiful, smart. She played the violin. We used to sit on the rooftop of my apartment and play music together. She wanted a quiet life. I wanted everything: money, fame, power, so I pushed her away, told her I didn't have time for her dreams. He paused. His voice cracked slightly. She left and I never saw her again. I chose business over love. I've regretted it every day since. Amara looked at him, her eyes wide. She couldn't imagine Bernard young and in love, sitting on rooftops with a violin-playing teacher. He always seemed so serious and strong. But now, in this moment, he looked fragile, I think. That's why your music touches me, he said softly. It reminds me of her. Amara didn't know what to say, so she reached out and held his hand. He squeezed it gently. As the weeks went on, Bernard's health improved slightly. He was still weak, still sick, but he smiled more. He ate more. He even asked to sit in a wheelchair and be taken outside to feel the sun on his face. The hospital staff were amazed. One day, Nurse Donna pulled Amara aside and said, "You're doing something no medicine ever could. You're giving him a reason to keep going." Amara felt proud but also a little nervous. What if she couldn't always be there? What if something happened? She talked to her mother that night. "Mom," she said, "what if Bernard gets worse?" Again, her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've already given him more than most people get in a lifetime. Love, music, hope. That doesn't disappear even if he does." Amara nodded, but her heart felt heavy. The following weekend, something unexpected happened. When Amara entered the hospital room, Bernard wasn't alone. A tall man in a suit stood by the window, holding a clipboard. He turned around and gave her a tight smile. "Ah, you must be the girl," he said. Amara looked at Bernard, who rolled his eyes. "That's James," he muttered. "My lawyer." James cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitmore has made some changes to his estate. He insists on including you in his will." Amara blinked. "What?" "But why?" "Because I want to," Bernard said firmly. "You've given me something no one else ever did. Joy. Peace. I want to make sure you're taken care of." James looked skeptical. "It's highly unusual. I don't care," Bernard snapped. "Do what I said." After the man left, Amara looked at Bernard. Nervously. "I don't need anything from you," she said. "I'm just happy to be your friend." Bernard smiled. "I know. That's why I want to give you something." Over the next few visits, Bernard began talking more seriously about the past. He spoke of boardrooms and betrayals, of deals that ruined lives and deals that saved them. He admitted that he had made mistakes, many. He'd fired people without cause, destroyed competitors without mercy, and walked over others to reach the top. "I was a shark," he said, "and now I'm just an old man in a bed, wishing I had done things differently." Amara said quietly, "But you're different now." He looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Because of you." Then one day something happened that changed everything. Amara came into the hospital to find the room empty. The bed was made, the lights were off. Her heart jumped. She ran to the nurse's station, fear rising in her chest. "Where's Bernard?" she asked, her voice shaking. Nurse Donna smiled. "Don't worry, sweetie, he's fine. He's been moved to a special suite upstairs. He asked for a bigger room so you could bring in a real piano." Amara's jaw dropped. "A real piano?" Said you deserved one? Sure enough, when she went upstairs, she found Bernard sitting in a beautiful private room. And in the corner was a glossy black upright piano. Shining under the sunlight from the window, I had it brought in, Bernard said. I wanted to hear what your music sounds like on real keys. Mara sat down and placed her fingers on the smooth ivory keys. The sound was fuller, richer. As she played, something inside her blossomed. It felt like her heart was opening and pouring out through her hands. Bernard closed his eyes. For a while it was just music, no words, no sickness, no regrets. Just music. But a few days later, things began to change. Bernard grew weaker. His hands trembled more. He couldn't sit up as long. He asked fewer questions and smiled a little less. The nurses told Amara that he was nearing the end. One afternoon, after she finished playing a soft lullaby, Bernard reached out and took her hand. I don't think I have much time left, he said quietly, but I'm not afraid anymore. Amara's eyes filled with tears. Please don't go, he gave her a sad smile. Everything ends, Amara, but not everything disappears. You've given me more than I ever expected at this point in my life. She leaned in and hugged him gently. His arms were thin, his body fragile, but his heart felt strong. He whispered, "Promise me something." She nodded. "Promise me you'll keep playing. Promise me you'll follow your dream. Don't ever think you're not enough." "I promise," she whispered. That was the last full conversation they had. A week later, Bernard slipped into a deep sleep. The doctors called it peaceful, never woke up again. When the news came, Amara didn't speak for hours. She sat in her room, staring at the music journal he had given her. She opened it and found something written on the first page in a shaky handwriting. To Amara, the girl who brought music back into my soul. Keep playing, always. Bernard Whitmore tears ran down her cheeks. But there was something else in her heart, too, something warm. It wasn't just sadness, it was love. Real, deep, powerful love. The funeral was small, private. Bernard had left. Instructions for only a few people to attend, but Amara was one of them. She wore a simple black dress and carried her keyboard. When the service ended, she stood beside the casket and played one final song. It was the melody she had played the first time they met, and as the notes floated through the air, even the coldest hearts in the room were warmed. Later that week, a letter arrived at Amara's apartment. It was from James, the lawyer. Inside was a note that read, "Per Mr. Whitmore's final will, you are now the owner of the Whitmore Foundation for Music and Arts. A trust has been set up in your name too. Help underprivileged children learn music. Also, enclosed is a deed to a building downtown. Mr. Whitmore hoped you'd use it to build your dream." Amara's hands shook as she read it. She showed her mother, who gasped in disbelief. Together they visited the building. It was an old but beautiful place with large windows and wide rooms, perfect for music classes. Amara stood in the middle of the empty space and whispered, "Thank you, Bernard." That night, she opened her music journal and began to write. Not just a song, but a plan. A dream and far away, wherever souls go when they are finally at peace. Bernard Whitmore smiled, because the girl who had once played a simple tune for a dying man was now building something beautiful from it, something that would live forever. After receiving the letter from James, the lawyer, Amara's life changed in ways she had never imagined. Suddenly, she was no longer just a young girl who loved to play music. She was the owner of the Whitmore Foundation for Music and Arts. The building downtown, a big old space with tall windows and echoing hallways, was now hers to use to help other kids like her kids who didn't have money or instruments, but who had dreams. The idea was beautiful, but it was also overwhelming. The first time Amara and her mother went inside the building, the air was thick with dust and silence. The paint was chipped, the floorboards creaked under their feet, and the light from the windows was soft but kind. It was not a fancy place. It wasn't the concert hall she had imagined, but it had something else: potential, chance. Amara stood in the middle of the main room, holding her music journal tight in her hands. She closed her eyes and imagined what it could be. She saw children laughing as they learned to play the piano, the violin, drums, and guitars. She imagined the walls filled with colorful paintings, music notes, and stories of hope. Her heart beat faster. "How will we start?" her mother asked gently. Amara looked around. "We have to fix this place first. Clean it, paint it, bring instruments. We need teachers too, and kids to come." Cynthia smiled. "It sounds like a lot of work, but I believe you can do it." That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She wrote down ideas in her music journal. What if she organized music classes after school? What if she created scholarships for kids who couldn't pay? What if she could bring in local musicians to teach? The possibilities were endless. But with all the hope, there was also fear. She had never managed anything like this before. She was still a kid, after all. What if she failed? The next morning, she called the community center where she had learned piano and asked for help. Mrs. Evans, the director, was thrilled and promised to send volunteers. Word spread quickly. Local musicians, music teachers, and even some students from the nearby university offered to help. Slowly, the building began to transform. Volunteers cleaned the floors, fixed broken windows, and painted walls in bright, cheerful colors. Amara watched as people worked together, feeling a deep sense of pride. It was her dream coming to life. One day a man arrived carrying a large box. He introduced himself as Mr. Santos, a retired piano teacher who had heard about the foundation through the news. Inside the box were dozens of music books, sheet music, and some old but beautiful instruments. "These belong to my late wife," he said. "She would have loved to see this place. Please use them well." Amara thanked him with tears in her eyes. As the weeks passed, more children began to arrive. They were shy at first, unsure of what to expect. Some had never touched a piano key before, others couldn't read music at all. But Amara welcomed each one with a warm smile and a promise. "Here you can learn," she said. "No matter where you come from, no matter what you have." The classes were simple at first. Amara taught the basics she knew. She used songs she made up, teaching kids how to feel the music, not just play the notes. The sound of laughter and music filled the rooms, pushing out the silence that had lived there before. One afternoon, as Amara helped a little boy named Jamal learn his first song, she noticed how his eyes sparkled when he finally played a simple melody without mistakes. It was the same feeling she had felt when she first played for Bernard. That moment reminded her why she was doing this. It wasn't about money or fame, it was about changing lives. But running the foundation wasn't easy. There were bills too, pay schedules to organize, and sometimes disagreements among volunteers. Amara often felt tired. Sometimes she wanted to give up. Her mother was always there to encourage her. "Remember why you started," Cynthia said one evening, sitting beside her. "It's okay to feel tired, but don't let that stop you." Amara nodded and took a deep breath. She also began to think about the future. Bernard's money could only do so much. She needed to find more support. So she started writing letters to businesses, asking for donations. She spoke at local schools and churches, telling everyone about the power of music and how the foundation was helping kids find hope. Slowly, community began to rally around her. One evening, a local news reporter came to the foundation to film a story. The reporter was kind and asked questions about Amara, Bernard, and the dream they shared. When the story aired on TV, more donations poured in. People sent instruments, money, and supplies. Some even offered to teach music lessons for free. Amara couldn't believe how much had changed. She was no longer just a girl with a dream. She was a leader, symbol of hope. But amidst all the success, there were still moments of doubt. Sometimes she wondered if she was doing enough. Sometimes she missed Bernard's calm presence in the hospital room. She missed his stories, his encouragement, and the way he believed in her. One rainy afternoon, Amara sat by the window, looking at the city lights. She opened Bernard's music journal and found the page where he had written to her. She ran her fingers over the words, feeling his spirit close. Suddenly an idea came to her. What if she organized a concert? It's a big event to raise money and awareness for the foundation. It could bring together musicians, children, and the community. She shared the idea with her mother and the volunteers. Everyone loved it. The weeks that followed were busy. Amara helped plan the event, inviting local artists and preparing the children to perform. She wrote a speech to tell the story of Bernard and how music had changed her life. The night of the concert arrived. The hall was filled with people, parents, teachers, musicians, and supporters. Amara's heart pounded as she took the stage. She looked out at the crowd and saw so many faces full of hope. She began by telling Bernard's story, the lonely billionaire, the girl with a simple tune, and the miracle that followed. Her voice trembled at first, but then grew stronger. When she finished, the children played their songs. Some were shy, some confident, but all played with heart. The audience clapped and cheered, moved by the beauty and courage of the young performers. After, the concert donations were even more generous. The foundation could now offer scholarships, buy new instruments, and reach even more children. Amara felt a joy she had never known. She realized that Bernard's gift wasn't just money or a building. It was the belief that one person's kindness and music could change the world. In the months that followed, the foundation continued to grow. Amara made friends with other young musicians and teachers. She learned how to organize events, manage funds, and inspire others. She also continued to play music herself. Every day, she sat at the piano in the foundation's music room, practicing new songs and writing her own. Music had become more than a gift. After a long day, Amara sat with her mother and looked at the city skyline. "Mom," she said softly, "I think Bernard was right. Music really does have magic." Cynthia smiled, "And so do you." As the years passed, Amara's foundation became a beacon of hope for many children. It wasn't just about learning music. It was about believing in dreams, healing hearts, and building a community where everyone mattered. And through it all, Amara never forgot the simple tune she had played for a dying billionaire that changed everything. That tune had started a miracle, and the miracle was still growing. Years passed, and Amara grew from a young girl into a confident young woman. Now the Whitmore Foundation for Music and Arts had become more than just a building or a program. It was a home for hundreds of children who came from all walks of life, to learn, to dream, and to heal through music. What started as a simple idea gift from a dying billionaire to a small girl who played a tune for him had turned into something powerful and lasting. It was a story of hope, courage, and change. Amara had worked hard every day. She had faced challenges, obstacles, and moments when she wanted to give up. But she never did. She remembered the promise she made to Bernard Whitmore that she would keep playing, keep dreaming, and keep spreading the magic of music to others. That promise became her mission. The foundation had grown so much that it now offered classes in many different instruments: piano, guitar, violin, drums, and even singing lessons. Teachers came from all over the city and even from other countries, volunteering their time to help children discover their talents. There were recitals, concerts, and music festivals where the students could perform for their families and friends. The foundation also started partnerships with schools to bring music education to children who had no access to it before. Amara watched all of this with pride and joy. She remembered how scared and small she had felt when Bernard first invited her to play in his hospital room. Now, she was the leader of a community that was changing lives. One day, as Amara was preparing for the foundation's 10th anniversary celebration, she received a letter that made her heart beat faster. It was from a famous musician, someone she had admired since she was a little girl. The letter said that he had heard about the foundation's work and wanted to visit, to perform a special concert, and to offer his support. Amara could hardly believe it. This was a dream come true, she wrote back immediately, inviting him to the celebration. When he arrived, he was warm and kind, impressed by the foundation and the children's talent. He talked to the students, sharing stories of his own struggles and how music had saved him. That night, his concert filled the hall with magic and inspiration. For many children, was the first time they had seen a professional musician up close. The event brought new attention to the foundation. Donations increased, and more people wanted to help. Mara saw the impact growing larger than she had ever imagined. But even with success, Mara never forgot the people who had helped her along the way: her mother, the volunteers, Nurse Donna, who had always been so kind, and of course, Bernard Whitmore, the man who had changed her life with just one simple tune. She often thought about Bernard's story, how he had been a lonely billionaire with regrets, and how her music had given him peace in his final days. She understood now that the true miracle wasn't just his recovery or the money he left behind. The miracle was the connection they shared through music and kindness. One afternoon, Amara was teaching a group of young children when a woman walked into the foundation. She looked around with tears in her eyes. Amara recognized her immediately. It was Ruth, Bernard's old love, the woman he had told her about. The schoolteacher who played the violin. Ruth explained that she had heard about the foundation and Bernard's last days. She wanted to meet the girl who had brought music back to his soul. When Ruth sat down to play the violin alongside Amara's piano, the room was filled with a sound so beautiful it made everyone pause. It was like a piece of Bernard's past had come alive, bridging time and pain and hope. The children listened, captivated. Ruth stayed and became a part of the foundation, teaching violin classes and sharing her love of music.
Oh.
She and Amara became close, like family. Amara realized that this was what Bernard had wanted all along: a chance to make things right, to bring people together, to create a legacy of love. As the foundation continued to thrive, Amara also grew as a musician. She wrote songs inspired by her experiences, songs about hope, courage, friendship, and healing. Some of her music was recorded and shared online, touching hearts far beyond her city. Though life wasn't always easy, Amara knew she was on the right path. She had taken a simple tune, played for a dying billionaire, and turned it into a movement. That was changing the world one note at a time. And so, the story that began in a quiet hospital room ended not with sadness or loss, but with music that would live forever.